Jon stood atop the battlements of Winterfell, watching the grey winds howl through the dead trees. Snow fell like ash. The war was over, or at least that's what they said. Stannis was dead, Renly had been gone for years, and Robb, well, Robb had died a king, even if the North wept for how it ended. But Jon wasn't just thinking of battles or banners anymore. He was thinking about a truth that had split his soul in two ever since Lord Stark. His uncle, not his father, had knelt beside him in the Godswood and told him everything. "You are not my son, Jon," Ned had said. His voice didn't shake. Ned Stark never shook. "You are my sister Lyanna's boy. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen." Jon hadn't spoken for what felt like hours that day. Just sat in the damp grass, staring at the weirwood tree like it would bleed truth. Then, "I'm not a Snow," he had whispered eventually. "You are no bastard," Ned had said. "You are Aegon Targaryen. The blood of the dragon flows through you." That truth had shattered everything. His hatred for the Targaryens, the shame of being called a bastard his entire life, the cold distance between him and Catelyn Stark. It all twisted like a knife in his chest. Now, months later, the North didn't quite know what to make of him. Some still called him Lord Snow out of habit or hate. Others, like Davos, looked at him like a loaded crossbow. "You have a claim, lad," Davos had told him just last week. "A strong one. Stronger than Daenerys." If the realm found out, Jon had shut him up with a look. He wasn't after crowns or thrones, but the realm already knew. Ned had revealed it before being imprisoned by the Lannisters. Before his execution could take place, Varys had intervened, and word had spread like wildfire. Some called it treason, others prophecy. By the time Robb was declared king in the North, the world already whispered that the boy beside him was no Snow, but a Targaryen in wolf's clothing. That changed everything. It changed the war. It changed how Catelyn looked at him, with guilt in her eyes now instead of cold disgust. It changed how the Lannisters saw House Stark, not just as rebels, but as a threat to the throne. And now, with the dust settling and bodies buried, Jon had to face a future that never belonged to him. A raven croaked behind him. Sansa approached, her red hair tucked under a thick cloak. She walked like a queen now, not the frightened girl who had once idolized Cersei Lannister. "You're brooding again," she said softly. Jon half smiled. "Is that what Targaryens do?" "Apparently." She stood beside him, silent for a while. "You should come inside." "They're waiting." "The lords?" She nodded. "Most of them. Even Tyrion." Jon turned to her. "And what do you want me to say to them?" "Tell them you're not our enemy," she whispered. "Because some of them think you are." He didn't answer, just stared at the horizon where the sky and snow met like two sides of a coin. He didn't ask to be Rhaegar's son. He didn't ask for a claim. He didn't even ask to live half the lives he'd already survived. But the world wouldn't care. Not the North, not the South, and certainly not Daenerys Targaryen, who was already sailing west with fire in her heart and dragons on her wings. The truth had been a blade, and now everyone was ready to see who it would cut next. Inside the great hall of Winterfell, the fire roared with too much force, as if it were trying to melt the tension in the room. But heat couldn't thaw mistrust, not among lords who had bled for their banners, only to be told they'd been following a lie, or worse, a dragon. Jon stood before them now, the weight of their stares heavier than any sword he'd ever carried. They weren't shouting, they weren't even speaking, just watching, judging, trying to decide whether to kneel or kill him. Lord Glover leaned forward first, his voice sharp. "So it's true then? You're a Targaryen?" Jon didn't flinch. "My mother was Lyanna Stark, my father Rhaegar Targaryen. I didn't ask for it, and I've never claimed anything from it. And yet here you are," Lord Manderley said, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "Sitting in Winterfell like you're still one of us." "I am one of you," Jon said. "I bled beside Robb. I fought for the North. I died for it." "Aye, and then came back," murmured a younger lord, Tallheart's boy, who had once looked up to Jon with wide, admiring eyes. "They say you rose from the dead. That makes you a god to some, and something worse to others." Sansa stepped in before Jon could reply. "He's not asking for a crown," she said firmly. "He only wants peace. Peace. Glover barked a short, bitter laugh. After all this, after finding out we followed a Targaryen in the Stark skin, what happens when Daenerys lands? You bend the knee to her. Jon's jaw tightened. I don't know what I'll do when Daenerys comes, but I know what I won't do. I won't betray the North. I was raised here. I am of this land. Whatever blood runs through me, my bones were built in Winterfell, but it wasn't enough. Not for them. Not now. The truth had changed the war, but it had also changed him in their eyes. To the Northern Lords, Jon had always been a Stark's bastard, easy to ignore, sometimes useful, never dangerous. But now he was dragonfire wrapped in snow, a prince who might be a pawn, or worse, a king they never chose. Lannister leaned back in his chair, watching it all play out with a tired smirk. I must say, he drawled, the North has a fascinating way of treating its saviors. The man helps win back your home, defends the wall, leads armies against the Boltons, and now you doubt him because he's honest about who he is. Manderley looked at Tyrion coldly. We've had enough of clever men, and yet you keep inviting me to dinner, Tyrion muttered. Sansa stepped forward again. We either stand together or we fall alone. You know what's coming from beyond the wall. You saw what Jon saw. The mention of the White Walkers silenced them more effectively than any threat. Fear was a powerful language, and Winter had begun speaking fluently. Jon looked at each of them slowly. I'm not asking you to follow a Targaryen, he said. I'm asking you to follow a man who's fought for you since he could lift a blade. I never wanted a crown. I never wanted war. But I won't run from either if it means saving the people I love. That was all he could say. He turned, cloak billowing behind him as he walked away from the table and out of the hall. Let them whisper, let them doubt. But in the cold silence that followed, even the lords of the North began to question if they could afford to lose him. Because soon they would have to choose between pride and survival. In the courtyard, Arya waited by the stables, arms crossed and blade at her side. They don't deserve you, she said without looking up. They never did, he muttered. She gave a ghost of a grin. We still have one enemy worse than the rest, Jon nodded. The dead. Arya shook her head. No. The living who still think you belong to the past. You're not just a Stark anymore, Jon. You're something they don't understand. He met her eyes, and for the first time he said the name out loud. Aegon. It didn't feel like his. Not yet, but soon. It might have to be. The wind off the wall had a way of cutting through armor and skin alike, but Jon had grown used to that kind of cold. The kind that sank into your bones and made you forget warmth ever existed. Still, this time felt different. They were back at Castle Black. He hadn't meant to return so soon. But the whispers in Winterfell had grown louder, and not all the looks he'd received were just cold. They were calculating. Some lords spoke of preserving the North, others of purity of bloodlines. He knew what that meant. And he wasn't going to wait around for knives in the dark, so he rode north. With him came Arya, Ghost at their heels, and Davos, ever loyal, even if he didn't always understand why. Castle Black was quieter now. Too quiet. Most of the brothers were dead or scattered, and the rebuilding effort was slow. But something lingered in the air that hadn't been there before. A weight, a warning. I don't like it, Arya said as they dismounted. Feels wrong. Davos nodded, gripping his cloak tighter. It always feels wrong this far north. But I know what you mean. Jon walked ahead of them, the old gates creaking as they opened. The smell of wood smoke mixed with rot. A few brothers greeted them, wary, tired. No smiles. Jon approached the courtyard and stopped. There, standing as if he'd never left, was Tormund Giantsbane, arms crossed. Hair wild as ever. You came back, Tormund said, eyeing Jon like a wolf would a rival alpha. I had to, Jon replied. Something's coming. Tormund stepped forward, his expression darker than usual. You should have stayed, Snow. You'd have seen it already. Jon frowned. Seen what? But before Tormund could answer, the horn blew once, then twice, then a third time, 3 blasts. Everyone froze, no one moved, no one spoke. That sound hadn't rung out in years, not since the White Walkers first attacked. But here it was again, echoing through the cold like a ghost from a forgotten nightmare. Jon's hand went to Longclaw. He and Tormund shared a glance, and they both ran. Beyond the gate, far out on the icy horizon, something stirred. At first it was just movement, figures trudging through snow. Then it became shape. Lines of bodies, marching, not running, not screaming, just moving forward, steady as a tide, and at the center of it all, standing atop an undead giant's back, was a rider cloaked in frost. Jon's blood went cold. "They're back," he muttered. "We didn't stop them," Tormund growled. "Didn't even slow them. Slow them." Davos, catching his breath beside them, looked pale. "They're moving south, which means they're going for Winterfell," Arya finished, her voice low and sharp. "We led them straight there." Jon didn't respond. He couldn't, because he understood, something the others hadn't realized yet. This army wasn't. Like before, it was bigger, faster, and it wasn't just filled with corpses. Among them were wildlings, Night's Watch brothers, northern men, Bolton's soldiers and worse, direwolves, undead direwolves, his people, his brothers, his blood, all turned, all marching against him. The old magic was gone. The wall no longer held them back, and no amount of steel or fire would save them this time, unless they united everyone. And Jon wasn't sure that was even possible anymore, not when half the realm saw him as a threat, not when Daenerys was nearly at the shores, not when people in the north were still calling for his. Head behind closed doors, he turned to them all. "We ride to Winterfell now." Tormund looked grim. "They'll beat us there?" "Then we die, trying to warn them." Davos put a hand on Jon's shoulder. "If what you say is true, they won't listen." "They have to," Jon said. "Because if they don't, there won't be anyone left to listen." The ride south was brutal. Snow fell in thick sheets, blinding and cold enough to freeze the blood in your lungs. Horses stumbled through drifts higher than a man's waist, and still Jon pushed them on. There was no time, no rest, no second chances. Winterfell had to be warned. But what haunted Jon wasn't just the cold or the threat of the dead behind them. It was what lay ahead. The faces waiting at Winterfell. The doubts, the mistrust. Would they even believe him, or worse? Would they finally use the truth about his name to get rid of him once and for all? By the third nightfall, they saw the lights of Winterfell flickering in the distance, tiny flames against a sea of black. Jon's horse was nearly dead under him. Ghost trotted beside them, limping from the long journey. Arya rode like a shadow, silent, focused, unreadable. Davos kept up, though each breath sounded like a dying man's last. At the gates, the guards barely had time to shout before Arya was off her horse, demanding entrance. Within minutes, they stood before the inner walls, soaked, half-frozen and covered in frostbite. Sansa met them in the courtyard, flanked by Brienne and a dozen wary soldiers. "What happened?" she asked, eyeing Jon's pale face. "They're coming," he said, panting. "The army of the dead, bigger than before." Sansa's face didn't flinch. "Oh, we've heard that before." Jon stepped forward. "You haven't seen this. They've changed. They move faster. They've taken direwolves, wildlings, our own. You saw them?" "Yes, at the wall. We barely escaped. They'll be here in less than 3 days." Brienne stepped forward. "Are you certain, my lord?" Jon locked eyes with her. "I'm not your lord." "But I am certain." Sansa's mouth tightened. "Get him inside. Feed them, warm them, then call the council." They obeyed, but the looks they gave Jon weren't the same as before. There was no awe anymore, no admiration, just fear and uncertainty. Later that night in the great hall, the fires roared again, but warmth didn't reach anyone's bones. Jon stood before the lords once more, this time flanked by Arya and Davos. Sansa sat at the head, quiet, thoughtful. She hadn't called him brother since he returned. Tyrion was there too, having stayed in Winterfell after Daenerys' ships were delayed by storms. He leaned against the wall, sipping wine, watching Jon like a man sizing up a dragon. Jon spoke plainly. "They're closer than ever before. The wall no longer holds them. Magic's gone. I don't know why. I just know what I saw. They have giants," Arya added. "Direwolves. Men we knew." A shudder passed through the room. "They're heading here," Jon said. "Winterfell stands in their path. If we don't prepare, we die. Lord Serwyn shook his head. Even if this is true, who commands them? The Night King's dead. Someone worse, Jon said quietly. He rides a dead giant, cloaked in frost. Magic burns in his eyes. Not like the Night King. Colder, smarter. You speak as if you know him, Sansa said. Jon hesitated. I don't, but I think he knows me. Tyrion stepped forward, voice calm but cutting. And what would you have us do, Prince Aegon? Should we kneel before you now, or wait until the corpses are at our doors? The word prince sliced through the room like a dagger. Jon's voice stayed even. I didn't come to claim anything. I came to save lives, and yet every time you show up you ask for something, muttered Lord Manderley. Our swords, our loyalty, our trust. Jon didn't reply. Davos stood instead. He's asking for none of that, only a chance to help. And what happens when your queen arrives? Glover spat. The Dragon Queen. Will she demand we kneel too? I don't know, Jon said. But if you don't fight together, none of us will be alive to kneel. The room fell into murmurs. Sansa rose slowly. We will prepare. We will gather arms, oil, dragonglass, if we can find any. I'll send word to the Vale and to White Harbor. But know this, if Winterfell falls, there is no second line. This is where the world either holds or ends. Silence. Then slowly the lords stood. One by one they began to murmur their support. Half-hearted, but enough. Tyrion met Jon's eyes. You've got their swords for now. But how long until they remember your name? Jon didn't answer. He already knew. They hadn't forgotten it. They were just waiting for the right time to punish him for it. The days that followed blurred into one long march toward death. Winterfell became a hive of noise and sweat and steel. Blacksmiths worked through the night, shaping every last scrap of dragonglass they had left, arrowheads, daggers, spear tips. Fires roared day and night to keep fingers from freezing, while people labored to build defenses. The scent of burning pitch filled the air, along with smoke from signal fires already lit along the northern ridges. But Jon could feel it, the undercurrent. It moved like a second wind through the halls. Not spoken aloud, not quite yet. But it was there, doubt about him, about his name, about whether a Targaryen could really save the North, or simply rule over its ashes. They still called him Jon in public, most of them. Even Sansa, even Arya. But now and then he caught it in their eyes, that flicker of fear when they remembered who he really was, or what they thought he might become. He'd been given rooms in the old Maester's Tower, far from the Stark family wing. At first he thought nothing of it. But Arya noticed. They've already begun isolating you, she said one night, tossing her knife from hand to hand as they sat near the fire. That's what people do to things they're afraid of. Push it outside the circle. Jon didn't look up. He was sharpening his sword for the 5th time that evening. Longclaw gleamed in the firelight. They're afraid of dying, he muttered. No, Arya said. They're afraid of you surviving. He didn't respond. She stopped tossing the blade. If Daenerys shows up, they'll turn on you. Don't doubt it. Jon finally looked up. Do you think she'll come? Arya shrugged. She's a Targaryen. She doesn't like being ignored. They both knew what that meant. She would come. And when she did, dragons wouldn't be the only things breathing fire. That night, he visited the crypts. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to remember the man who'd lied to him, or protected him, or both. Ned Stark's statue stared ahead, quiet and cold. Jon knelt before it, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. I don't know what you expected, he said softly. Revealing the truth. Maybe you thought it would help, bring peace, give me strength. But all it's done is rip everything apart, he paused. I don't blame you. Not really, I wish I could have stayed your son. That was simpler. Footsteps echoed behind him. He turned. Sansa stood at the edge of the hall, arms wrapped tightly around herself. You always come here when you're lost, she said. Jon rose slowly. I guess I've been lost my whole life. She walked closer, eyes shining in the torchlight. I'm trying, Jon, truly, but it's hard. When I look at you, I see our brother, and then I remember you're not. Not fully. I don't want the throne, he said, voice tired. I don't want anything. Just peace. You know that doesn't matter. She looked him in the eyes. If you're Rhaegar's son, then you're a threat. Even if you sit quietly, others won't. I never wanted to be anything more than a Stark, but you are more. And that's the problem. Silence passed between them like a wound reopening, then the horn blew. Once, twice. A pause, then a third time. Jon's eyes widened. "No," he whispered. He and Sansa ran. They reached the outer wall just in time to see the scouts racing back to the gates, screaming, "They're here!" They're already here. And over the ridge, like a tidal wave made of flesh and frost, the army of the dead crested the hills. Thousands, tens of thousands. The moonlight glinted off ice-covered armor and frost-bitten eyes. But this wasn't chaos like before. This was a formation, structured, focused. They weren't just attacking, they were surrounding, and at the center of it all, visible through the snow, was him, the Frost Rider, cloaked in bones and snow, eyes glowing with blue fire, a sword of jagged ice at his side. He looked directly at Jon, across the field, across the howling wind, and lifted one frozen hand, and the dead stopped, waiting, watching, thinking, and for the first time since Jon had seen the Night King, he felt something worse than fear, recognition. The silence was suffocating. Thousands of corpses stood like statues beneath the pale moon, their blue eyes flickering with unnatural stillness. It wasn't the frenzied chaos Jon had seen before at Hardhome or beyond the wall. This was calculated, measured, as if someone, something had learned how to command death like a general commands an army. From Winterfell's ramparts, the defenders stared, breath held, weapons clenched. No screams, no arrows loosed, just waiting. And in that waiting, fear crept deeper than any blade. Jon stood atop the battlements, his knuckles white around Longclaw's hilt. He stared at the Frost Rider, the new commander of death, and the rider stared back. Sansa appeared beside him. "Why aren't they attacking?" Jon shook his head. "I don't know." Arya crouched low beside a narrow slit in the stone wall, peering through her spyglass. "He's watching us, studying us, and buying time," said Tyrion, stepping up from the stairs, cloak flapping in the cold wind. "This isn't a siege, it's a trap." Davos joined them, panting from the run. "We're not ready for this. Half our weapons aren't forged. Archers are barely trained. We've got old men and children on the second line." Jon didn't look at him. His eyes were still on the rider. If they wanted to overrun us, they could have. "They're waiting for something." "A signal?" Sansa asked. "Or someone," Tyrion muttered, his eyes flicking to Jon. "Someone they know will come." Jon turned to him. "You think they're waiting for Daenerys?" "I think they're waiting to see how much you'll risk to stop them." Tyrion stepped closer. "They didn't come to conquer Winterfell tonight. They came to rattle you." "Then it's working," Arya said coldly. Suddenly a cry from the southern watchtower. "Riders! From the south!" Jon's heart skipped. He ran for the higher platform, and there, through the blinding snow, he saw it. Torches, dozens, and above them, the wings. Dragons. They swooped low over the army of the dead, sending them into a momentary frenzy. One of the creatures, Drogon, let out a roar that shook the very stones beneath their feet. Daenerys Stormborn had arrived. She rode Drogon's back like a blade of vengeance, silver hair whipping in the wind, face hard with fury. Beside her, Rhaegal dove and soared, riderless but fierce. The fire of the skies had come to join the fire of the north. She landed within the outer gates as Unsullied and Dothraki spilled through behind her, taking position with speed and precision. Jon was already moving toward her before she even dismounted. Daenerys climbed down slowly, her violet eyes locking with his. "You could have sent word," she said coolly. Jon's voice caught in his throat. "We didn't have time. They're different now." She looked past him, toward the field of stillness where the dead stood waiting. "I can see that." For a moment, no words passed between them. Just old pain, unanswered questions, and the heavy truth of bloodlines and birthrights still hanging between them like a sword over both their heads. Tyrion stepped between them, ever the diplomat. "Your Grace, we're grateful you arrived when you did." Daenerys's eyes never left Jon. "I came for the living, not gratitude. Sansa approached then, her voice guarded but civil. "We've begun fortifying the keep. You're welcome to coordinate your troops with ours. Are they ready to fight beside a dragon queen?" Daenerys asked, raising an eyebrow. "They'll fight beside anyone who bleeds for them," Sansa replied. "But don't mistake their silence for loyalty." The tension thickened. Jon stepped between them. "Enough. We don't have time for this. They're not moving yet, but when they do, there won't be a second chance." Daenerys finally turned from him, walking past toward the wall to see the enemy for herself. When she saw the Frost Rider, she froze. She stared at him for a long time, face unreadable, then whispered, "That's not the Night King." "No," Jon said, coming up behind her. "He's something worse." Drogon let out a low growl from behind them, his head turning toward the field. Rhaegal joined him with a sharper screech, and then, as if some unseen command had been given, the Frost Rider raised his hand again. This time, he didn't stop. The army of the dead began to move, slow, steady, unstoppable. Jon turned to the defenders behind him. "To positions!" Winterfell roared to life, horns blowing, torches lit, fire pits ignited. Dragons took flight. Daenerys mounted Drogon once more, her face grim with resolve. Jon turned to Arya, his voice low. "Stick to the shadows. Strike only when it counts," she nodded. "I know." Then he turned to Sansa. "You get to the crypts." "I'm not hiding," she snapped. "It's not hiding," he said firmly. "It's surviving. If I fall, if we fall, someone has to lead." And then he looked to Davos. "No retreats," Jon said. "Not this time," Davos nodded. "Until the last." As the dead began to charge, their war cries nothing but silence and frost, Jon took one last breath and whispered to himself, "I was never meant to be a king, but maybe I was meant to end this." Then he drew Longclaw, and the battle for the living began. The ground shook with the weight of the dead. They poured toward Winterfell like an endless wave, limbs broken, eyes glowing, jaws snapping. Snow whipped around them, torn by the rush of their march. The night, already dark, turned darker still as the sky vanished beneath the swarm. From the battlements, archers loosed flaming arrows. Catapults launched barrels of wildfire and dragonglass. Spears pierced dozens at once. Bodies fell, but only some stayed down. Jon led the charge on the front line, Longclaw gleaming in the torchlight. His breath turned to steam with every swing, every kill, every close call. The cold was alive. It clawed at his fingers, choked his lungs, whispered in his ears. Next to him, Tormund roared like a madman, cleaving through a cluster of wights with an axe in each hand. "Is this what you call peace, Snow?" he bellowed. Jon didn't respond. He was too busy saving his life. The Unsullied held formation like stone, their discipline iron against the madness. The Dothraki, what few remained from Daenerys' earlier battles, charged again and again on horseback, swinging curved blades with bone-breaking fury. Drogon and Rhaegal soared overhead, spewing fire that turned ice into steam. Every blast lit up the night for seconds at a time, just long enough to show the scale of the horror beneath. Thousands, tens of thousands, and in the midst of it all, the Frost Rider still watched. He sat astride his undead giant like a god, judging the damned. He didn't fight. He didn't move. He simply raised a hand once in a while, sending sections of the army into sudden, unnatural formations. He wasn't trying to win through brute force. He was studying them, testing weaknesses, and it was working. Inside the walls, chaos had broken out. Some of the dead had made it past the outer defense. Sansa, deep in the crypts with the civilians, and Maester Vulcan, heard the screams before the guards did. The cold that followed wasn't natural. It seeped through stone and shadow. She turned to Gilly and little Sam, her face pale. "Barricade the doors now." Back on the field, Jon was losing ground. Too many, always too many. He turned and saw Arya vanish into a swarm. His heart stopped, but seconds later, she emerged on the other side, blood-covered, dagger in hand, moving like shadow and death. Then a screech split the sky. Jon looked up to see Rhaegal tumbling, a massive ice spear lodged in his chest. No. The dragon crashed beyond the walls, flattening a section of Winterfell's eastern tower. Fire burst from his broken lungs before fading into silence. Jon turned and saw the Frost Rider lowering his hand. So he can kill dragons too. Jon's rage broke through the fear. He screamed and charged toward the rider, but the dead blocked his path, 10 thick, unyielding. He fought like a storm, but they didn't stop coming. Drogon dove toward the rider in fury, Daenerys screaming from his back. Fire swallowed the field where the rider stood, but it didn't touch him. The flames parted around the rider like waves around a stone. The undead giant beneath him burned, fell, but the rider stood still, now walking forward through the fire, untouched, unafraid. Jon's heart slammed in his chest. It's not fire, not dragonglass, he gasped. It won't kill him. The realization came too late. The rider pointed toward Drogon, and from the shadows another spear launched. This time, Drogon dodged, but barely. Daenerys lost her grip, tumbling off his back and crashing hard into the frozen ground. Drogon roared and circled, but couldn't land amid the chaos. Jon screamed her name, running toward her, but someone else reached her first. A wight, taller than the rest, blade in hand, raised to strike, and then it dropped. Arya. She appeared from nowhere, the blade of Valyrian steel in her hand, sinking deep into the wight's skull. It collapsed. "Go!" she shouted to Daenerys, dragging her to her feet. Jon reached them seconds later. "We need to fall back now." But Daenerys shook her head, blood running down her temple. "We fight. This is where we end it." He grabbed her arm. "You don't understand. He's not like the others. Fire doesn't touch him. Dragonglass doesn't slow him. Then what does?" Arya asked, panting. Jon looked toward the crypts, his thoughts racing. "Old gods, old magic. The weirwood tree," he whispered. "That's where the magic was born. That's where it ends." Daenerys blinked. "You think the gods would?" "He's not just death," Jon said, realization dawning. "He's vengeance. He wants Winterfell, wants to erase everything it stands for." Arya clenched her jaw. "Then we give him what he wants. We lure him there." Jon met her eyes. "He'll come for me." Arya nodded. "Then you go." "We'll cover you." Daenerys stepped forward. "You'll die." Jon looked at the battlefield. "The bodies, the flames, the hopelessness. Then I'll die. But not as a Targaryen, not as a Stark, just as Jon, the bastard who was never meant to matter." He turned, heading toward the Godswood alone. Behind him, Winterfell burned. Ahead of him, death waited. The Godswood was silent. Snow drifted down between the skeletal branches of the weirwood tree, its face carved deep with ancient sorrow. The red leaves barely rustled. It was the only place in Winterfell untouched by fire, untouched by blood. Jon stepped through the trees slowly, breathing hard, sword hanging from his fingers. He could hear the battle raging behind him, screams, the clash of steel, the roar of dragons. But it all felt distant now, like it belonged to another world. This place was where it all began, where the old gods watched, where the truth had first been spoken, where death had come for so many before him. He knelt at the base of the weirwood, resting Longclaw on the snow beside him. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "If there's anything left of the magic in this place, I need it now." The tree didn't answer. It never did, but the air changed, grew heavier, colder. Behind him, the wind howled once, and then stopped. Jon stood and turned. The Frost Rider had arrived. He stepped between the trees like he belonged there, like this was his domain. The snow around him didn't fall. It froze mid-air. His armor shimmered with ancient symbols etched in dead languages. And his eyes, those eyes, they weren't empty like the others. They were angry. "You know who I am," Jon said, voice low. The rider said nothing. "You came for me, not for Winterfell, not for the living. For me." Still silence. Jon raised Longclaw. "Then come." The rider moved, faster than a man should, blade of ice in hand, striking with a force that shook the earth. Jon parried, but barely. The cold from the rider's weapon leapt into his bones, numbing his fingers through steel and leather. Every strike rattled his soul. This wasn't just a battle of blades. This was old magic, old vengeance, clashing in the heart of Winterfell. They fought across the Godswood, between roots and branches, past ancient stones. Jon bled. The rider didn't, and slowly Jon began to understand. He wasn't meant to win this fight, but maybe he wasn't meant to survive it either. He fell once, hard. Snow rushed into his mouth. He rolled, barely avoiding the blade that split the tree trunk behind him. The weirwood bled red sap. The rider paused, looking at it. That was when Jon struck. He didn't go for the rider. He stabbed the tree. Longclaw plunged deep into the ancient. Roots, dragonglass, and Valyrian steel ripping. Through the oldest magic in the north, the weirwood shrieked. Not with sound, but with something deeper. Something wrong. The rider screamed too. His voice was no longer silence. It was pain. He staggered back, and the storm around them broke. Winds howled. The snow swirled violently. A burst of light cracked across the sky, and Jon, with all his strength, pulled the blade free and drove it through the rider's chest. This time, it sank deep. The frost cracked. The blue fire in the rider's eyes flickered, and then, finally, he shattered into ice, bone, and silence. Jon fell to his knees. Everything went still. Outside the godswood, the dead stopped moving. Wights collapsed where they stood. Screeches turned into silence. The moaning, the rattling, the shrieking, it all vanished in a single breath. In the courtyard, Arya lowered her blade. Sansa stepped from the crypts. Daenerys stood alone beside Drogon's landing. Her eyes wide as she watched the enemy fall like puppets with cut strings. Winterfell had survived. Barely. Hours later, the sun rose. Jon stood by the broken tree, bloodied, shaking. Arya found him first, then Sansa, then Davos. No one spoke. Then Daenerys approached. She looked at him, not like a rival, not like a threat, but like something she didn't understand, couldn't control, would never fully trust. "You killed him," she said. Jon nodded. "How?" He looked at the broken roots of the tree. "I think he was tied to the old magic." "The first magic?" "The children of the forest made the Night King. Maybe this one was their second answer, or their last curse." "And you broke it," she said softly. "I didn't break anything," Jon replied. "I just let it end." Daenerys stepped closer. "You could claim the throne now. No one would stop you." Jon didn't answer. Sansa watched, waiting. Arya narrowed her eyes. "I'm tired," Jon said finally. "Of thrones, of names. Let the realm rebuild without me." "You'll never be just a man again," Daenerys said, her voice quieter. "Not after this. Then I'll go where men are forgotten." And that's what he did. Days later, Jon Snow rode north again. Past the ruins, past the shattered wall, past the whispers of war and blood and names that never truly belonged to him. He left behind the lords, the queens, the fire and the snow, and became at last what he was always meant to be, no one. Always meant to be, no one.